Hi, I'm Chris Colvin. I'm the founder of In the House, and this is one of our regular programs. Every Friday at noon Eastern Time, we have what we call GC Casual Fridays. These are normally very interactive sessions where we encourage people to share whatever the topic of the day is. We have a slightly different format today because we have a webcast that we'd like to get through on the corporate legal department of the future. We think this is really a relevant topic for right now because in the current crisis with both the health crisis and the economic crisis happening at the same time and being interrelated, I think that technology transformation is happening very quickly. So we're basically in a time of rapid acceleration. A couple very quick tips before we get started. One is mute yourself if you're not speaking. Two is, if you do speak, please identify yourself, your name, your company, maybe your geography, and then ask your question. And we will have a Q&A session later. And thirdly, encourage as many people as possible to turn on their video if they are going to participate, so that we can see and interact with each other in as human a fashion as possible. I think it's really important right now that we have interactions that are as calm and as normal as possible. And I think that involves seeing, looking people in the eye, gesturing, hopefully smiling occasionally at least, and supporting each other as much as we can. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Nita Sanger. Nita is a legal innovation consultant, and I'll be going into her background in a little more detail. But I just wanted to quickly introduce Nita and welcome her and thank her for participating in our program.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate that.
So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen so that you all can see our PowerPoint presentation, and we will begin to go through it. I'm just going to get into presentation mode here. So hopefully you all can see that. Nita, are you seeing that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay,
It's all good.
great. So let's dive right into our topic, which is the corporate legal department of the future. And we're really going to explore in the next 50 minutes or so how corporate legal departments are responding to this, what we're calling the age of uncertainty. There's a lot of issues that are happening rapidly. We're all adjusting in our personal lives, in our professional lives. Many of us have children at home and many other it's a strange time for all of us. But one thing that's great about lawyers is we're taught to be calm in a crisis. And I think we have a real important role to play in our companies and, in our interactions with our peers. So let's all stay calm and we'll get through this. We faced challenges before, and we'll come through this one okay in the end as well. So a little bit about our background. Many of you already know me who regularly participate in these discussions, but in addition to being the founder of In the House, I'm a former engineer. I started out as a software engineer for IBM. Because I brought that engineering background to the law, I've thought during my almost 25-year legal career, I've really seen the need for innovation in the law. I bring an engineer's eye to the practice, and I've thought for many, many years that we need innovation. I'm not alone. Many people think we need innovation in the law. I think what's different now is a lot of people are beginning to recognize that this needs to happen more quickly, and we need to adjust. I also work as a legal innovation consultant and as a intellectual property litigator, and I've had executive roles at several legal technology companies as well. Nita Sanger brings more than 20 years of experience in strategy, operations, innovation, and transformation consulting. You can see her background there. And one thing that's really great about Nita's background is this is not her first crisis rodeo. She has been through this before, most notably in the 2008 financial crisis. And she particularly saw how that crisis impacted professionals in the financial services industry. She had a long career with Deloitte prior to launching her own consulting practice. And she saw how that crisis impacted not only people on the business side, but the legal department specifically. And Nita, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that all legal departments are now going through what financial services legal departments went through in 2008 and 2009, or something very similar.
So, Chris, thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. This is a time when almost all businesses are going to be faced with a lot of challenges. But so the thing that I did want to highlight was that yes, I did go through a market downturn, and what we actually saw was that this was the time where true leaders actually step up and say, okay, we understand that things are really hard, but what should we be doing to position ourselves for success in the future? And a lot of time when they bring in someone like myself, it's usually when things are not going well, and when they're down, they're facing some kind of a condition that really doesn't make it easy. And so that's when, so I'm actually used to coming in when things are going hard for the leader who brings you in. But the key thing is that the leader's got the foresight to say, okay, now I need to figure out what do I need to do to position my business for success going forward.
That's great, Nita. I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think the main thing we all need to take away from the crisis is that crisis is an opportunity for leaders to lead. It's a time to step forward and be counted and really try to make a difference. It's also sometimes a time for new leaders to emerge. So I think that we all need to think about where we are, take a deep breath, and sort of do the best we can to demonstrate leadership among our peers and within our own legal departments. And of course, there's new challenges involved with that when we're all pretty much working from home. So let's dive right into the substance of our presentation. So Nita, one thing we wanted to emphasize right at the beginning is we're all human beings, right? And we're all going through this all at the same time. And so this first slide is just a reminder that don't forget to be caring and empathetic with your coworkers. I mean, I'm very interested in, I read a lot on leadership and history and great political leaders, great military leaders. One thing great leaders all have in common is they not only bring strength, they bring warmth, and they bring a real connection with the people that they lead. And so I think we need to keep this in mind. We already, before our current crisis, we already had an issue in our country of cultural distancing, where there was political polarization, which you've all heard about. There was sort of the coastal elites versus the heartland people. So, you know, so-called. There's decreasing memberships in clubs and organizations. So this is a real issue in our society that we were already grappling with. But now when you bring social distancing on top of it, where we are literally physically separated from pretty much everyone other than our direct family members, that brings new challenges, right? So we have this double challenge. And so what we need really now more than anything is a form of emotional togetherness. And again, recognizing that people are emotional beings is not weakness, it's actually a form of strength. So make sure that you recognize and empathize with others going through a challenging time. A couple of specifics, I'm not going to go into all of these. We are going to send these slides around, but we have a lot to cover. But try to really take a deep breath and think about, what am I doing within my own legal department to foster that kind of emotional togetherness? A quick reminder to please mute yourself if you're not speaking, because we want to avoid background noise. So a couple ideas. One is, don't forget to talk openly about those types of needs, say at the beginning of a meeting that you're participating in. And absolutely do use video conference. If you don't know how to video conference, please learn it today. Seriously, you need to be able to connect by video. It's not the same as connecting by phone. Phone is not a good substitute for in-person meetings, but video conference is at least a decent substitute. I wish we could all be at our regular meetings, but we can't. So you must learn how to video conference effectively. Another idea is, think about having more casual meetings, you know, the virtual water cooler, the virtual happy hour. You'll see that people are doing that. If you can, if you're in a position to, think about sending a virtual survival kit or work from home survival kit to the people in your legal department. Luckily, our delivery companies are still working. The U.S. Postal Service, UPS, FedEx, you can still get packages to people. So think about, doesn't need to be expensive, but I've heard of people sending laptops to their employees loaded with video conference software. That's great if you can afford it, but even much simpler, even just a daily email with a couple of tips and techniques. A couple books are there at the bottom that I highly recommend, because it's a good time to be reading and learning. And those are two great books that talk about cultural distancing and the challenges those face. So let's dive into the data a little bit. As some of you know, we are doing what I understand is the first survey of in-house legal departments about this crisis and how we're responding to it. And so we have some interesting data that's already in. The survey is still open. We have about 60 respondents so far. We're hoping for more than 100. So we'll be keeping the survey open for a few more days. And I urge you all, if you are an in-house lawyer, to please take that survey. If you know in-house lawyers, feel free to send that to them, and the contact information will be made available. So on the left is really, here's what we're going through right now. And as you can see, some of this isn't so surprising, right? We're doing virtual meetings. We're canceling non-essential travel. We all know that anecdotally. There's the data to support it now. The thing that I think concerns me and Nita a bit are those bars to the right. Very few companies are sending personal protective equipment to their employees. I think that is something you should absolutely consider doing. I know every drugstore in my neighborhood doesn't have any hand sanitizer or anything else, or face masks. Think about sending that material to your employees. They will remember it for the rest of their lives if you do that. Arrange for employee testing if you possibly can. This is something you might be able to do for your employees, and I urge you to consider it. So those are some things that we can do that will really make a difference. So again, please mute yourself if you have background noise. Thank you. Another another on the right really deals with what are we anticipating going forward. And as you can see from these bars, most of us in the in-house counsel community, or close to half of us, think it is either very likely or likely that there will be pressure to decrease our costs and increase efficiency. And then a lot of people are uncertain, right? And uncertainty is a problem in itself. Maybe the most telling statistic is, significantly under 20% of people think it's unlikely or very unlikely to experience that kind of cost pressure. So I think we're all going to be facing a lot of challenges in terms of getting through this environment. And there will be things like cost cutting, and I hate to say it, headcount reductions, and we need to be prepared for that possibility. So Nita, why don't you take us into a little more detail in terms of the current market downturn and what we can start to expect in this environment?
Sure. So thank you, Chris. I think what's becoming clear is that we are actually heading into a market downturn. We don't know how severe it's going to be, and we don't know how long it's going to last. So the one thing that most CEOs tend to do when they're faced with this situation is to actually sort of take a look at their businesses, and sort of they want to determine what they need to do to continue profitability. And so the things that they're actually going to focus on is like, how do you maintain profitability? But the first thing they look at is, what can we do to reduce our bottom line cost? And when they tend to do that, the first thing they'll do is look at all their non-revenue generating businesses, of which legal sort of falls front and center into that. Today, the CEOs actually have multiple options of things that they can be doing. They have the option of deciding which of them they can use technology to downsize, or to combine their businesses. They have options where they can use managed service providers, send it out to someone who can do it at a lower cost. They can think of like alternate uh, talent models. So they have a lot more options than they did before. And so I think that is something for everyone to sort of think about, because this is something that the CEOs are going to be thinking about very rapidly. And since legal is probably going to be sort of put in this position, it's a good time for them to think about what is it that they want to be doing. Chris, any thoughts and comments on this before we move forward?
Yes, let me actually take you to the next slide, because I agree with everything you said, Nita. And I think one thing we really need to do is kind of bottom line things right now and be very, very clear. And so my takeaway, based on what I learned from you, Nita, and what I've learned through my own experience going through the last couple of weeks, we're really in a situation where I think for the vast majority of in-house lawyers, they're going to be faced with the challenge of disrupting their own practices or being disrupted by forces beyond their control, whether it's the C-suite mandating cost reductions or even headcount reductions or other types of disruptions that are going to occur. So I think this is unfortunately one of those moments in life where people need to step forward and really take stock of what's going on in their department and what they can do personally and what they can do with their peers to make a difference, to really show. And it's not only to help your legal department conduct itself more efficiently. It's also about demonstrating leadership to the C-suite, which is really always important, but especially important right now. So really the two main points here on this slide are general counsel, and I would also include other assistant general counsel and other in-house counsel. They really need to use this time of transition to re-engineer their corporate legal department. Number one, really position yourself for success. This too will pass, right? And you want to come out on the other side successful and stronger. And that does happen in times of challenge. It's scary for all of us. We've never been through this before. I've had a 25-year legal career and a more than 30-year business and legal career, and I've never seen anything quite like this situation. So I'm worried. I'm, sheltering with my family, but we need to look past this, right? And also, this is a really good opportunity to become that indispensable strategic advisor. I mean, I've seen lip service on this question for years and years. This is actually the time to do it. It really is. And so we've heard leaders, both President Trump and then Joe Biden in the recent debate, they both basically said we're on a war footing. We're at war with a healthcare crisis, and we're at war with an economic crisis. And during times of war, things are scary, but it is a time of opportunity for leaders to step forward. So I urge everyone to think about that and take that seriously and really do whatever they can. So Nita, I'll pass it back to you. And if you could dive a little bit more into sort of what is the legal services ecosystem and what's happening in right now as we speak to that environment.
Got it. So thank you. So Chris, I cannot agree with you more. This is the time for leaders to step up and shine because there is going to be a real need for this. So let's just talk about it. It's not all doom and gloom. So this is in some ways actually a very good time to be a general counsel in the internal legal department. So here's why I actually say that. So until a few years ago, essentially, it was a seller's market with law firms, and I know I see some people from like some of the big law firms who are on the call, but essentially the law firms are very much dictating the services that they could offer. They were dictating the cost that they could charge. In the last few years, and few I mean 4 to 5 years, we've actually seen an increase in things like alternate legal service providers with deep pockets coming in, offering some very sort of good services to corporate legal departments. The big four outside of the US, they're actually some of the biggest providers of legal services, in fact, and within the US too. So they're really putting a push to sort of provide services to corporate legal departments. And at the same time, you have so many startups that are looking to see how they can actually help corporate legal departments become more efficient. There are actually some that have even come up that are looking to see how you can actually help you figure out your spend, how you can sort of make that much more efficient. And now law firms are also upping their game on trying to become much more innovative, trying to automate their own processes, and are willing to sort of discuss about, how can we do, alternate fee arrangements or even negotiate costs. So I think from the perspective, there's a lot of positive going on for corporate legal departments. So if we could move to this next slide, that would be really great.
Sure. Real quick on the last slide though, Nita, I want to comment just briefly, and I apologize,
Sure.
but I want to emphasize a couple of things. Number one is we've been having slow technical change in the legal profession. Again, what's happening now is we're really speeding that up, number one. Number two, the time has passed for general counsel and others to say, hey, law firms, change. The message now needs to be, we are changing. You're either coming with us or you're being left behind. And this is a time for GCs to take charge. They're the natural leaders in this profession. And I think it's really time for them to get that message to all their providers, whether they're law firms, alternative legal service providers, legal technology companies. It's really a time for leaders.
Thank you, Chris. Couldn't have put that better. So this brings me to the next sort of page. So this is something that I've actually put together saying it is true that the general counsel and the corporate legal departments are facing a lot of challenges, but the reality is there's huge amount of opportunities. So first, the businesses are becoming increasingly global. There's a lot of regulations that are put in place, and all of you must have heard of GDPR, and there's multiple other regulations that are being put in. There's a rise in the exponential technologies that are coming in, which bring with it new risks and exposures. And guess who is ideally positioned to actually help the C-suite figure out how to deal with this, it is the corporate legal department. This is actually the chance for them to actually become the strategic business partner to the C-suite. So I cannot say how valuable it is at this point in time for the GCs and the corporate legal departments to say, okay, what is it that we can actually do to help our corporations as they try to deal with the situation, as they're going to try to innovate their businesses and make sure that they provide the right guidance to their leadership.
I
Chris,
think
any
that's
comments?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think that this is a time of tremendous opportunity and a time of tremendous change. And this is the time to stop talking about, not just talking about being that trusted advisor to the C-suite, but stepping into that role right now without delay. And I think that's the maybe the primary message that Nita and I would like to get to all the GCs out there, that this is a time of great opportunity. And it's a really healthy time to be looking at those silver linings, those whatever we can find. And one of those silver linings is it's an opportunity for those who are willing to be bold to seize those opportunities.
Agree. So, what do we think that the corporate legal department of the future is going to look like? So, and this is just a visual that kind of represents it. And this was sort of developed after discussions with a number of GCs and legal COOs. And this was done in a group in London to actually develop that. So, the thing that the department of the future is going to be much more integrated, efficient, data driven, will actually almost create like an ecosystem and leverage all the players in the ecosystem. And all of this is going to be enabled by technology. So let's talk a little more about that. So Chris, and then can we, so all of us these days are very much used to having, either computers or computers, iPhones, and having everything at our fingertips. In some ways, actually, Apple has actually spoiled us to make it very much that the user experience is very seamless. In some ways, that's what we need to create for the corporate legal department. A single place, which is going to be at the desktop of every corporate legal department lawyer, which aligns with the way how they work. So if they're actually going to be doing an M&A deal, what is the actual process from the time they start to the deal to the end of it? And as they're going through the different activities, they need to be able to access all the tools and solutions that they need during that. So it needs to be that single front end providing that seamless experience. Now let's talk about this on the back end, what that's going to mean. What you're going to need is to actually create an ecosystem at the back, a collaboration portal that brings together not just the internal tools that exist within the firm. So realize when you're doing innovation, it's not going to be done in isolation. Your firm is already probably using a bunch of technologies. If they're using the cloud, all of that will need to be integrated in what's going to be provided. You'll have internal resources like knowledge management, analytics. They need to be brought in. Then look at what are the outside resources, your law firms, your alternate legal service providers, your legal techs. All of these need to be working together in ecosystem at the back end. And in the front needs to be that single front end, which every corporate legal department lawyer can access. And then ideally it should be one single platform, but realizing that given that we're all working in businesses, some would have more regulations than others, you're going to need to decide whether this is going to need to be hosted regionally or globally. And then because there might be some language issues, some of those in the different regions may need to have some special tools and solutions, but overall it needs to be as consistent as possible, aligned with the business of how the lawyer operates. Chris, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just two quick sort of observations on this topic. One is that while we refer to the future, much of this technology already exists. It's just that lawyers have been slower than their peers in other and other professional services areas to adopt this type of technology. And the other thing that you also mentioned, Nita, and I think is worth highlighting, is lawyers are already used to using highly efficient tools in our daily lives in the form of smartphones, in the forms of all the apps and systems we're using. We're ready. We're ready to adopt those technologies to our practice. And the only thing holding that back is the will to make those kind of changes within the legal department. So I think a lot of these elements exist. We just need to corral them, get them under control, and
Yep.
find the corporate will to make this happen. And I think that will come because of the current crisis we're going through.
And then, Chris, what I did want to add was that I've actually done this and seen this in other services businesses, which, and I come out from the consulting world, and we've actually seen and done that for other clients who are in the services businesses. So this is being adopted. So which means even if the legal department doesn't have, the chances are your tax or your audit businesses, a lot of them already have some of these. And so now the key is to kind of, for the corporate legal department, and as we keep on emphasizing that, for the leaders to step up and say, hey, this is what we should actually be. We can also do it if our counterparts in the other groups were able to do that as well.
Absolutely. And so these are some of the suggested actions you have, Nita. Maybe we go through this relatively quickly since we will be
Absolutely.
distributing this, and we want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A for folks.
Perfect. So, like Chris said, I'm not going to go through each one of them, but the reality is that these are some suggested actions. And whereas they seem like they're like just 9 in number, this is something which is kind of can be very complex, because actually transformation can be messy. It's messy. It's iterative, and you have to keep on sort of testing and seeing what works, what doesn't work. And there's no one size fits all. Your firm's journey is going to be very specific to your firm, because your starting point is different, what tools and solutions you're already using are different. But and the two big pieces of this is, one is look where you are today, and so that and do that in terms of what are your processes, your technology, your people, and then map out what needs to be done going forward. So those are sort of the big pieces of this. And the assessment of where you're today is not a it'll take you like less than a month, but the actual sort of transforming a business is a much longer process. The one thing I did want to emphasize in all of this is that change is hard. And the thing that one needs to keep in mind is people, right? Make sure that you bring your people along on the journey. Sometimes people tend to forget that, and people at the top are like, oh, this is easy, we're going to get this done. But realize at the end of the day, it's the people who are going to be using the tools, solutions, make them feel part of the solution and part of the journey. That's going to be very, very critical. And Chris, before I give it back to you, what I did want to say was that we have a lot more information behind this. If anyone wants to hear more, learn more, how do you actually do innovation, how do you set up an innovation lab, or you probably already may have one within your firm, how do you leverage that? Happy to sort of chat further about this. But Chris, would sort of want to hand it back to you if you have any more sort of thoughts and comments, and take it from there.
Yeah, well, here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to sort of put on my GC cap here, and I'm going to push back a little on some of this, Nita, and
Sure.
say, well, okay, I would love to have an innovation lab, and this sounds great, but how can I go right now in this economic, as we head into the beginning of what could potentially be a long economic crisis, how can I, as the GC, go to my CEO or whoever it is in the C-suite and get additional budget for these types of activities? Isn't this a difficult time to ask for resources for this kind of project?
So thank you for bringing that up. So I think what the leader actually needs to do is to sort of realize, if this is important, there's going to be ways to do that. Maybe think about, okay, how much am I spending with my outside counsel? Is there a way to take some of that to do this? So there is no easy answer to this, but if you don't do this, it's going to be either you do it to yourself or somebody else is going to do it to you, because your C suite is definitely going to be saying you need to become more efficient. Or they might decide that they may not, whether they might take something even more drastic action. And so that's the thing. If this is the time for leaders to say, before the leadership comes to them, they should actually go to them and say, here's what we're planning to do, is here how we plan to execute on this, so they can see that the forward thinking role that the leaders are playing.
Right. Now that makes sense to me. And I don't mean to put it too bleakly, but this is a sort of a scenario where if you can demonstrate that you're part of the solution and that you're
Yep.
thinking about solutions, then you can protect yourself so you're not perceived as part of the problem, quite frankly. So I think again, I agree with you. It is time for leaders to step up and be proactive. And even if budget can't be acquired for a project such as this, or it can't be redirected from other resources, I think in many cases, the effort will be appreciated and the gesture will be appreciated
Hmm.
from the C-suite. So I guess let's bring it all together so we can move to the Q&A portion of the program. So Nita and I have a very similar perspective on the in-house legal community and what's important. And really the idea of this presentation, as well as the community that I started called In the House, is really to help people in the in-house legal community. And so we call it our triple bottom line. So number one, we want to help individual GCs and other in-house counsel to have long, successful, enriching long-term careers, even now in this difficult time. So that we always keep our eye on that very important role. Number two, moving up a level in terms of hierarchy, we really want to help corporate legal departments be perceived as innovators and in fact be innovators, and to establish themselves as those indispensable strategic resources and the trusted advisor to the C-suite. And again, this trusted, what do people do in a crisis? They try to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, but they also reach for trusted advisors. And if you're a GC, that's your natural role. So this is your time to be that trusted advisor in a way that is rarely presented. It's really a unique opportunity to demonstrate that. And thirdly, and most broadly, we're really interested, and In the House, we're interested in helping the in-house community as a whole to gain power, prestige, influence, not only within the legal profession, but also within the larger business community. I mean, I sometimes say that GCs are really unsung heroes because we often operate behind the scenes, but what we do is absolutely essential to not only running our legal departments, but running our companies and keeping the economy strong. And so we have a lot of important roles to play in that regard. So really, we want to help achieve on all three of these levels. Any additional thoughts on that, Nita?
No, no, I think you couldn't have put it better.
So now we're to the Q&A part of the program. We encourage people to, I'm going to stop the share for a moment so we can all see each other, at least those of us who've enabled our videos. And I'm going to, at the risk of a lot of background noise, I'm going to unmute all. And then I encourage people to ask questions, and I may remute after we get a
So
chance
can
to
I
hear from
answer
folks.
one thing? Because I see
Yes,
something in the chat. It
I'll
says, how do
remute.
you manage cross?
Sorry, I muted everyone, including you. So unmute yourself, Nita, or I'll do it. I got you. There you go.
All right, so I just saw a question which says, how do you manage cross-border privilege issues with a global platform? So this was something that I was mentioning, saying that you have to decide based on your business, because and I've done this for businesses where there is issues where information cannot cross borders. So that's when you decide whether you have one single platform globally, or you actually do it regionally, because you're going to need to keep, because if you're having business in Europe, a lot of the information they do not want it hosted on US servers, or there's ways to do it that you have a single back end and you have like very thin front end. This is where technology will become really critical to figure out what needs to be done, but it's very, very key to ensure that you meet all the regulatory issues, which means if data is not allowed to cross boundaries, make sure you do not do that, which is where a legal department becomes really important. So I hope that helps, and happy to chat more if you have more questions around this. But
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Nita, that to broaden that a little bit, I think meaty issues like this, I kind of think that's why we all went to law school. We love
yeah.
figuring out these challenging
Mm-hmm.
questions. And I think engaging with your peers, sharing information, and solving these types of problems is how we show our value. So in
Mm-hmm.
some ways, the more challenges we face, the more we have an opportunity to shine. And I definitely don't think, I urge everyone to resist any temptation to say, oh, there's a bunch of problems with moving to a platform like this, so we're not going to do it. Because then I think you risk falling into that sort of very old fashioned view of the legal department. I've heard terms like the house of no, and, the people that say no to revenue generating projects and things like that. That's old school, get it through legal, that's very
Yeah.
old school. And in this community, especially, we're modern and forward thinking. So, those are challenges, yes, but we can get through them. And that's why we went to law school and why we've got years of training to handle that. So I am going to unmute now and take hopefully some verbal questions from the group. Really quickly, just a reminder, if you don't mind, identify yourself and just let us know where you are and what your question is.
Hey, Chris, it's David.
Hi, David.
One point. Well, I hear some voices. I don't know where that's
I hear
coming from,
some
but
children. So here, let me mute again, David, then unmute yourself. So
okay.
we're kind of we're experimenting here, so I can usually, there you go.
One point is this idea of the GC as the trusted advisor in the C-suite, and that we're trying to promote our role and our value within the company by becoming more involved in the decisions of the C-suite. What's interesting is with this crisis now, um, I'm, I'm, I'm sure a lot of us are kind of dealing with those specific issues of how can we be a better advisor in the C-suite at this time, and what's some of the uh, key advice that we want to let me just mute that person.
Yep, no
What's some of
problem.
the key advice or some of the things that other council are dealing with in this situation of I mean, some businesses are doing well and are going to continue to do well, where other businesses are really sort of facing an existential threat now with
Right.
laying off all employees. And I'm wondering what we can do more as the general counsel for our clients, what sort of advice we can give our CEOs, and also noting that our interests are now becoming less of just kind of servicing legal needs as much as just aligning more directly with the business leaders of our companies and
Hmm.
figuring out what they have to do now to get past this.
So can I just make a comment on that? Because as if I mentioned to you, your CEOs are going to need to think about how they sort of transform their business. They might be saying what technologies we put in, because everybody seems saying, oh, we'll put in AI, or we'll use blockchain, all the cool terminology, but they don't realize all the legal implications of those, which is, and I'll say this, that when I was at Deloitte, we actually launched something to disrupt our own business, a startup, etc. But we didn't bring legal to the table. Then it took us 18 months to get past legal risk and regulatory, which is why as your company is going to start to think about how they transform their business, if they don't bring you to the table, they are actually going to be being further set back before they're actually going to implement it. So I think the key now is for, in some ways, for all of you to become not more tech savvy, but understand the implications of all these technologies that are coming out and what that means. Because then that's how you can tell your leader, hey, this is not, you cannot do it X, but let's think about doing it in this fashion.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. The only thing I'd add to David's question, to answer David's question, from my perspective, is it's not a time for self-promotion or
Mm,
putting yourself forward, certainly, right? It's a time to be a problem solver. So I think the
mm,
way you want to present yourself to the C-suite is, hey, I'm ready. Let's roll up our sleeves. I may be
mm,
sitting at home in front of my laptop, but
mm,
I know how to do a video conference. I would suggest if your CEO calls you or your COO calls you and wants to have a phone call, say, hey, why don't we try video conference? I'd like to see you. I'd like to catch up a little bit. So play against type, right? Play against that traditional type of the lawyer who it doesn't know technology and isn't ready to deal with this crisis. You want to show up and you want to be a problem solver in a modern work from home environment.
mm. Agree.
And you have peers, trust me,
Mhm.
you have peers who already know how to do all this stuff. Connect with them, talk with them. If you feel a little behind the curve in terms of work from home, advice I give frequently is get yourself a green screen. I mean, we can all afford a $40 green screen so that, your kid isn't walking around in the background, right? I mean, that can be humorous in some of the videos we've seen on YouTube and so forth, but you don't want that. You want to present a very professional approach. You can get a green screen. You can get your corporate logo up there on the green screen. And I think that'll be impressive to the executives and the peers you deal with.
And one more thing to add on that, Chris, what I would say is I totally agree with what you're saying. But now think about, put yourself in your CEO's shoes. What are the issues that they're going to deal with? And then almost like be proactive and come out with the sort of solutions for that. Say, hey, we realize you're going to need to think about that. Why not think about this is a way to solve it? Or,
Right.
why can we not do something like this? I think to me that would then put you absolutely, and they'd be like, sure, this is great.
Absolutely. That's such good advice. I was trained, my background's in intellectual property litigation. I was trained by a great trial lawyer when I was just a young lawyer. And he gave me this great advice. He said, pretend you're the only lawyer on the case and come to the partner and tell them what you would do if it
Yeah.
was your case. And I've always tried to have that attitude. It's been really helpful advice. Even 25 years later, I still think back to that. And I think that same applies to the CEO, right?
Mm,
Put yourself in their shoes and say, hey, I know you're in a really rough spot here with all
mm,
these, cost reductions. I want to be there to help you solve these problems. Here's some thoughts I had, so
Mm.
be proactive and reach out and show that you're at least trying to think from their own challenging
Yep.
perspective. So get out of your own head, get out of your own perspective. And that's part of, goes back to that empathy question. So empathy doesn't also only go down the chain to the people in your department, it goes up the chain and laterally to your peers. So
Mm.
try to stand in their shoes and get through this together. Other questions out there? I'm going to ask people to unmute themselves because my unmute all experiment didn't go very well because we have quite a few people on the line that aren't, so any questions out there? So we have about 7 minutes left in the program. If I don't see any further questions, then we can move to just our concluding slide. Any last observations? And by the way, we jumped right into this program really quickly because we had a lot to cover. And I neglected to introduce the co-host of GC Casual Fridays, who is David Slater. He's been co-hosting these with me for more than a year now, I think, right? So we started out, I think we were weekly, we were twice a month, and we're back to the weekly format, especially given the current scenario we're in. So I want to thank David for all the great work. And he typically will summarize these proceedings on our website afterwards so that people can go back and see the topics that we covered. So Nita, do you have any last observations before we just proceed to our last slide?
No, I think I'm good. And if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Chris or myself, and we're happy to answer them.
Great, and we'll put our contact information
Yeah.
up there. So let me.
Nita, one other question is how can some of these tools and apps that you've been describing be used specifically for this crisis now? And for instance, more people are work. I mean, everyone's working from home now as much as
Right.
possible, and so Zoom obviously has become like a huge sort of technology or
Mm-hmm.
other kind of video interfaces.
Right.
Are there any other sorts of apps that the corporate legal department are using that could be like deployed specifically for like kind of dealing with this crisis? And
So there are lots and lots of tools and solutions out there. So it depends so this right now, you're right. Right now we're using Zoom, etc. But to actually do some of the things that you do on a day-to-day basis for M&A deals, there's like tools that are available, or do contract reviews, contract generation. There are so many different tools for each one of those things that are there. Right now,
yeah,
a lot of them are
I
sorry, go ahead.
heard, sorry to interrupt, but I heard, for instance, DocuSign is really big. Kramer was
Yes,
mentioning it on his TV show, and
yes.
Yep.
So
the idea
DocuSign
of
is,
people
Sorry.
being able to sign agreements without having to
yes.
do face-to-face
Yep,
meetings.
Yep.
online signing documents, but document generation, document reviews. So Kira Systems does document reviews, document generation. LawGeek does document generation. So that if you want,
Right.
it depends on what, for literally these days, for anything that you're looking to do, there is there's a solution out there. Now it's kind of bringing it all together,
Right.
so that's why I said look at your processes and then figure out the ones and then do end to end. What are the tools and solutions you're going to need? I can name you some of the ones that I'm aware of, but
Sure.
it literally depends for what you're looking for. There's like an app for it's like the equivalent of an app for
Right.
everything.
Yeah, so I think, so that's a great question, David, and I'll give you my perspective on that. I think there's plenty of solutions out there. The
Yeah.
question is really, how do you curate them and how do
Yeah.
you bring them to the table? How do you make them secure? How to the question we had before, how do you make them respect attorney-client privilege and all those other things? So, but so that's something where a lawyer needs to team with a technologist and maybe a consultant to help them
Mm.
figure this stuff out, right? Because we need to reach out to others and figure this out together. And the time really to figure it out is now. So in
Yeah.
some ways, our companies, I mean, hopefully our companies are continuing to operate and conduct business, but we're all on some level hitting the pause button. And there's maybe some ways more time to think and reflect on these issues. So some advice I give is don't obsess over the news. Don't watch 24/7 news channels. You can catch up a few times a day with like the New York Times app or the Apple News app or whatever you use. Check in. I try to check in maybe every 3 hours, but not watch TV obsessively. It's not going to do any good, and you're going to get caught up soon enough. No matter how bad the crisis is, you'll catch up with it. take that time to connect with peers, read a book, start to sort through some of these apps that are out there. I mean, another example, just to throw one out, is like a year ago, I would mention Slack to lawyers, and it was like the sound of crickets. Slack? What's that? And I saw there was a movie, Slackers. I'm like, no, 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 it's a thing, you know? And so I've been a startup GC for years. So I knew what Slack was almost from the beginning, right? So because my clients were using it and I was on their Slack channel, right? So that's another, and then Workplace for Windows is not Workplace for Facebook's another one. Workspace is one for the people that like Facebook. Teams, Microsoft Teams is another one. So there's a lot of these sort of apps, but which one's right for you depends on a lot of different things. So it's beyond the scope of this call, but you know, we're in kind of this Wild West period where lots of solutions are emerging. And the question is, how do you pick the solution that's right for you, or really the suite of solutions? And how do you tie them together into that front end, back end framework that Nita highlighted earlier? Someone says they're using Adobe Sign. So there's obviously each of these has a.
That's something, there's multiple solutions for each of the areas that you're looking at. And you have to pick what's right for you.
Absolutely. So, you know, find your sensei, find your guide, and start to figure this stuff out, because again, you will be appreciated for being proactive and grappling with this issue. And I want to just highlight something Nita said, which is, yes, we're in a time of declining budgets, probably for many of us, some of us extremely declining budgets. We may even be worried about our own jobs, unfortunately, but that is actually the time to step forward. You don't want to get in a defensive crouch right now professionally. Maybe you're doing that personally and staying at home, but you know, you do not want to do that professionally. This is the time to sort of don't be afraid, be bold, get a little out of your comfort zone, take some risks. By getting out there and providing advice. So you know, I think this is really a time when you cannot afford to be defensive. You need to be playing offense in your own career, not in an aggressive way. You don't want to, you know, overstep boundaries at all, but you want to be, I guess you want to be aggressive in helping, right? You want to be aggressive in being a problem solver for your peers and your you know, your C-suite peers, especially in this time.
And like you said, Chris, be part of the solution and
Absolutely.
not part of the problem, because if you don't, then it's going to get done to you versus you being in the driver's seat.
Right. And I don't want to be too grim about this, but in some companies, there's going to be an above the line, below the line moment.
Yep.
You've got to be above the line. You're not going to be above the line by hiding. That's never going to work. Maybe it works in peacetime, but we're kind of in wartime. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. So in these times. So let's get to the last slide, because I feel like I've gotten a little too dark, and I apologize for that. But you know, we can do this. You know, we really can do this. So here's just a few resources that are available for GC. Certainly, you know, inthehouse.org is our website. We try to be a resource by having these meetings and other activities. I'm personally available. I try to, you know, live the mission of In the House by being available. So my email's all over the place, but it's chris@inthehouse.org. Please feel free to connect with me. I can't always respond immediately because I do have I wear a number of hats, and I'm pretty busy. Nita's email is there as well. Please feel free to reach out to Nita. We're easy to find on LinkedIn. You know, our names are a little more unusual than, say, John Smith. So if you put my name into LinkedIn, you'll probably find me. There's, I think, also a basketball player, but if you saw my height, you'd know that wasn't me. So then there's some articles here that we linked to. The links will be available. We'll distribute this presentation, and you'll be able to click on these thought leadership pieces that I think are particularly applicable to this moment. And lastly, let's end on a positive note. You know, this is a time of difficulty for all of us. One thing that's really interesting is we're kind of all in this together, even celebrities. So we have a couple of funny videos that are attached at the end or linked at the end, and you'll be able to link to those and open those. I encourage, you know, you could send this, when we send this presentation around, you could send it to your peers, and you could say, go straight to the back and click on the 2 videos, because those are fun. One is Jimmy Kimmel doing his you know, show from home, which is kind of fun. He's got his kids running around, and you know, kids are climbing all over him while he's trying to do the show. So it's very cute and fun. And the other one's an older video where it's this BBC commentator who has his kids walk in, and my reaction to that, I saw that years ago and thought it was hilarious, but we're all that guy now, right? You know, we're all that guy with the kids coming in and interrupting his conversation. And it's just a matter of sort of getting through that with humor. I mean, one personal note is I've been trying to share with my family before dinner. I kind of find a video during the day, and then I'm like, okay, we're all going to sit down at the dinner table. Let me play you this funny video so we can all sort of get in a nice frame of reference. So I've been sharing like the video of the day, and tonight I'm going to share the Jimmy Kimmel video with my family. So I think that's really important. And I think if we don't have any further questions, we will wrap up. But I think Nita and I are both available. We're going to, I think, stop the share and stop the and turn off the recording, but then we could have sort of an off the record discussion. So I want to thank Nita. Thank you so much for your participation and all the wisdom and insight you bring to the table. Thank you, David, for being a great co-host. I kind of look forward to these Fridays at noon so we can get together and help each other. And we'll be here every single Friday at noon Eastern time, as much as long as technology permits, that we'll be here. So please look into our community. We're at www.inthehouse.org. We are dues supported, so if you can spare the rather minimal dues, we encourage membership, and we always appreciate the support. And I will stop the video and see you all next Friday, but feel free to stay on the line. Thank you.